Today's online lesson is called England and the New World, or What Took You Guys So Long? Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492. He was sent by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who had just kicked out the Moors, a group of Islamic conquerors who had occupied the Spanish peninsula for almost 1,000 years. The king and queen felt pretty good about themselves. They had unified the country and were willing to take a gamble on Columbus, with the hope of spreading Catholicism across the globe and making a few bucks in the process. Yet England would not set up its first colony until 1607. That's over 100 years. What took the English so long? And what finally motivated them to start colonizing North America? Those are the questions we're going to explore today in this online lesson. But first, our aims. Students will be able to identify the effect 16th century British political and religious conflict had on delaying colonization efforts. Students will also be able to identify the major causes driving British colonization in the early 1600s. Great. So the political scene in England was a mess in the 1500s, and at best, England was considered a second-rate power. It was sort of like a reality TV show, just with a lot more death, blood, and guts. The country was in a state of civil war, known as the War of the Roses, until 1485. This is actually what the Games of Thrones is based on, so you can imagine how violent it was. But Henry VII finally came to the throne and settled the question of who is the rightful king of England. But this was not the end of the trouble. Henry VIII, the son of Henry VII, causes another stir over religion. He launches what comes to be known as the Reformation in England. Henry VIII wanted to divorce Queen Catherine of Aragon of Spain, who was very Catholic, but also getting older and having trouble having kids. She did have one daughter, however, named Queen Mary, and we'll talk about her in a few minutes. So Henry VIII wants to get rid of Catholicism so he can get a divorce. The Pope was denying King Henry the right to get a divorce. King Henry, not one to take no easily, ends up making the whole of England Protestant and establishes the Anglican Church, which he is the head of, and allows himself to get divorced from Queen Catherine. He would go on to have 7 other wives. He would also persecute many Catholics, and this would lead to even more gruesome deaths and torture. Not to be outdone, Henry VIII's daughter, Mary, the daughter of Queen Aragon, who was very Catholic, once her father dies, comes to power and wants to restore Catholicism to England. She does this, you guessed it, by killing many Protestants, as well as torturing them. She does this so much that she's known as Bloody Mary. She came to power in 1553. But her sister, Queen Elizabeth, would succeed her in 1558. And she didn't want Catholicism to be the official religion of England, and she then restored Protestantism and the Church of England in 1558. And guess what? She killed 100 Catholic priests in the process and tortured many other people. But she is known and celebrated for finally putting an end to this religious turmoil that had lasted almost all of the century. And she establishes England as a Protestant nation. But this is all to say, while Spain was unified behind King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and under the Catholic religion, England was warring over what type of religion they wanted to be, and following the whims of some crazy kings and queens. Not a good context for launching a risky and expensive colonization adventure project. So it was the political and religious turmoil that stopped England from colonizing for so long. In addition, England long struggled to conquer and pacify Ireland. This lasted well into the 17th century or the 1600s, and took money and energy that could have been directed to the New World. Ireland was Catholic, and was seen as a threat to the new Protestant faith emerging in England. The government, the kings and queens of England, used military conquest, the slaughter of civilians, the seizure of land, and settlement by English Protestants to eventually take control of Ireland. This struggle still goes on really into the 20th century. But the methods the English used to conquer Ireland would later be used in the Americas to conquer the Native Americans. So, by the end of the 1500s, England had established itself as a Protestant nation, and now it considered Spain enemy number one. To make matters worse, Spain attempted to invade England with its armada in 1588. That's what you see in this painting. They failed disastrously, and England grew confident in its naval power. England now wanted to free the world from the tyranny of the Catholic Pope and launched its own colonization project as part of its mission to spread Protestantism. They also saw Spain as particularly violent and brutal to the Native Americans, and, at least in theory or rhetoric or speech, they set out to protect Native Americans from Catholic brutality. There are several other motivations for British colonization. Nationalism was a big one. Many British leaders and thinkers at the end of the 1500s thought that through colonization, Britain would gain the wealth and power to compete with Spain and France. They also saw trade, rather than gold or sugar, as another motivation. New Spain controlled Mexico and most of Latin America, and the gold and silver mines there. New France controlled the area known as Canada, and the fur trade there. England was left with the middle area, which did not have gold and could not grow sugar. Instead, England hoped to establish farms on fertile land, promote trade and shipping, and sell to new markets. The goal was to profit from trade. In addition, England was not a good place to live in the 1500s, and if you were a peasant, you would be looking to leave as soon as possible. The population of England grew from 3 million to 4 million people from 1550 to 1600, but the economy could not produce enough jobs for everyone. There was also something known as the enclosure movement, which kicked peasants off of land so merchants and landowners could more efficiently farm or raise sheep. This left many peasants without a purpose, land, or food. It also meant that they had just kicked off human beings for the benefit of their sheep, which says a lot about how they prioritized life in the 1500s. The peasants then flooded the cities, wages dropped dramatically, and people began to starve. Other peasants just wandered the roads looking for work. They called these people vagabonds. By the end of the 17th century, it was estimated that half the population lived in poverty. A popular solution to the social crisis was to have this surplus or extra population help to colonize the New World. In the New World, the poor might have the opportunity to become productive citizens and contribute to the nation's wealth. The English elite also believed that working for wages was a form of servility or slavery, and considered wage labor a loss of liberty or freedom. In other words, wage workers were servants. So if you think you're really independent because you got a summer job, the English elite think you're just playing into the system. Only those who controlled their own labor through the ownership of land could be considered truly free. The New World was seen as an opportunity for the poor, the wanderers, even criminals to gain freedom and independence because they had so much land available for the taking. John Smith, who helped found Jamestown in 1607, wrote when he landed in America that, quote, "Every man may be the master and owner of his own labor and land," end quote. The main lure for immigrants from England to the New World was not so much riches in gold and silver, as the promise of independence that came from owning land? Great. So, based on the online lesson, answer the 2 questions below using complete sentences and specific examples. We will work with them tomorrow in class. So, why did it take so long for England to begin to set up colonies in North America? What was the religious context? What was the political context? And what was the military context? And what were 4 major reasons that caused England to begin setting up colonies in North America at the beginning of the 17th century? I'll collect those at the beginning of class. See you tomorrow.